This week, Raffael Marty from ConnectWise is with us to discuss MSPs and security. Then Jim Routh from, where is he from? We changed this at the last minute. From RevealSecurity, joins us to talk about detecting breaches in applications and why every security team needs data science expertise. Finally, in the enterprise security news, Google in the sandbox, Quantum Mania. Wiz raises $300 million, is now too expensive for anyone to buy. MDR firm Deepwatch raises $180 million, tons more funding. Zscaler adopts Canonic at an early stage. Cisco and Trend Micro also make some acquisitions. No Name Security is rumored to be in talks of acquisition, despite how confused the lawyers must be about what is being acquired. Siren files for bankruptcy, the kind you don't come back from, liquidation. The SPACs are unraveling. Even cyber criminals are doing layoffs. There's too much news this week. We really shouldn't skip weeks. Romance scanners, favorite lies exposed, all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Old Stuff Day. This is episode 307, recorded on Thursday, March 2nd, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and I think I've done about 100 episodes of these now. But I still mess up the intro sometimes. And joining me is the master of marketing, the mayor of mayhem, necromancer of newsletters, Tyler Shields. How are you, Tyler? Shaver of beards.
The shaver of beards, yes, I am. And I must say, since today is Old Day and you've done 100 episodes, does that make you the old guy?
You know what's funny about that? Like, I was expecting National Old Stuff Day to be about nostalgia, but it's about throwing out the old stuff and starting new. So I guess I should leave. See ya.
We should just call it a day. Turn it off right here. Call it a day. Gus, fold it. We're done.
Yeah, we got to find some younger models. Turn ourselves in. Also joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the captain of content, the princess of predictions, Katie Teitler. How are you, Katie?
Oh, princess of predictions. I like that title. Someone once asked me at a job when I was taking a new role. Someone once asked me at a new job when I was taking a new role what I wanted my title to be, and I said, "How about Queen?" And they laughed, and I said, "No, I'd like to be called Queen. That'd be cool." I didn't get that title. No.
I've seen some funny titles. Some companies you can get away with it; they'll let you do it, and some companies not so much. Also joining us is the Baron of Bloodhound, the Pirate King of PowerShell, the Inquisitor of Identity, Sean Metcalf. How are you, Sean?
Inquisitor of Identity. Yeah, I like that. It's almost like the Spanish Inquisition, which no one ever expects. So I'll take that. I'm doing good. I also want to wish my lovely wife a very happy birthday, and spring is coming. So all good things.
Happy birthday. What's her name?
Candace.
Happy birthday, Candace. Speaking of identity. All right, a quick announcement here. Security Weekly listeners, it's that time of year, RSA conference time, so you can save $100 on a full conference pass. RSA conference will take place April 24th through 27th in San Francisco. Really hope you have some hotel rooms or lodging already. If not, get on that. You might want to go the Airbnb route at this point. It will be on demand also, though. So if you're not physically going to go, there is going to be some content that you can get remotely. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC 2023 and use the code 53UCyber. That's 53, the letter U, Cyber. We hope to see you there. And I indeed will be there. I don't know how many of our other co-hosts will be there. Any of you?
I will not.
No,
not this
that's
time
a no.
around.
No, Sean. No, Katie. How about you, Tyler?
They don't let me leave the house ever.
On demand it is. All right. Today's topic is the state of the MSP space. It's hard for me not to say MSSP. I'm so trained to put the extra S in there. But we're excited to have Raffael Marty, General Manager of Cybersecurity at ConnectWise, with us today. And as part of the executive team at ConnectWise, Raffael is responsible for all aspects of the cybersecurity business, has over 25 years of experience in cybersecurity, leading teams at ForcePoint and Sophos. And as a founder, he helped start Pixel Cloud and Loggly. Raffael is also an investor and advisor, and that's the last time I'll call him by his full name from now on. Welcome, Rafi.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. It's an interesting space. I was just having a chat with somebody about having a guest on the show, and they're asking me, what we were looking for in that guest. And one of the things I think is good to have every now and then is to have somebody who's not fully both feet in InfoSec, has some of that perspective of being both outside and inside, one foot in both worlds. And being in charge of an MSP, security is not the only thing you're worried about. So I think it's always interesting to have the perspective of someone who hasn't drunk too deeply of the Kool-Aid, to put it.
Well, I definitely have drunk some Kool-Aid, right? And maybe what the interesting pieces for me is ConnectWise is really a provider of a platform for MSPs to do their business. So I actually deal with thousands of MSPs on a daily basis. Those are my customers that I get to serve and hear how they're doing. So I have a pretty interesting vantage point from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something we want to delve into today is how that's changed over the years. I mean, clearly, if you drink the Kool-Aid too deeply, you've got people saying security is the most important thing. Like if you don't get security right, it's going to kill your business. And we know that's not true. We know it's important, but it's not, sometimes the FUD, the marketing there gets a little too extreme and exits reality. So, yeah, I think it would be, maybe, just your thoughts on how it's changed over the years. Is security, does it come up in every conversation, or just more than it used to? What's your general take on the temperature today in terms of those conversations and how concerned the MSPs you work with, which maybe we need to get to that first, the structure of ConnectWise, because at first I assumed you guys were an MSP, but you actually make software for MSPs. You serve the MSPs themselves that then serve the customers, correct?
Yeah, so we basically, very quickly, we have sort of three business units. The one is business management services. So these are all the tools that an MSP needs to run their business, from billing and invoicing and quoting products and things like that. We have a unified monitoring business where it's all about remote management, patching, change management, and things like that. And then the security business, right? And with the security business that I'm responsible for, there's products we sell, there's services we sell. We have a SOC of 200 people that monitor the consoles for the MSPs that are then basically delivering the service to their customers, right? So in the end, on the security side, we work with about 6,000 MSPs, and they're protecting somewhere in the 90,000 SMBs out there, right? And that's really the exciting piece here, is we get to scale quite a bit. It's not a few dozen customers that we protect, but we help protect hundreds of, or almost 100,000 of them.
Right. Yeah. Downstream. And that's, I think that's important, for the perspective, we're going to talk about today. I think we might talk from, the end customer perspective a little bit here in terms of, what kind of technology they're needing, what they, how they interact with the MSP, but also a lot from that kind of 10,000 foot view of, when you're building something for a whole bunch of MSPs, how does that change? What kind of trends do we see there? But yeah, SOC of 200 people, that's a big SOC. From all the SOCs I've heard of, I'm sure that's a challenge in itself, right?
absolutely. And I'm really fortunate to have a fantastic team around me, right? They have been doing this for quite a long time, and we've been growing just like crazy. There's just so much demand out there, because the problem really starts with the small business, right? They need some kind of protection. Well, they can't go to one of these large security companies and get a service like, look, we don't know what to do. We don't know what products to deploy. We don't know how to manage them. If there are alerts coming up, what are we going to do, right? So they turn to the MSP. Then you have all kinds of MSPs out there, right? There's ones, literally 2 people, they have never heard of security, but they have customers that they want to help secure, and they might sell them other IT services. And as part of that, how do they help them secure all these different things, right? So they turn to us, and we can really literally give them whatever they need. If they want to deliver some of the services themselves, then they can do that. But if they don't have that capability or don't have the resources, then they can turn to us, and we deliver almost the entire service all the way down to the customers. And that's really the benefit that they have a trusted partner in us that they can go to market with.
And how do you do that at scale? Because, maybe it's different at the small business level, and they don't need, the services, the things they need aren't quite as differentiated as when you get into larger companies with different kinds of infrastructure, different kinds of environment. But I assume even at the small business level, like some of them are, 100% office, maybe like a real estate business or a mortgage business. And then some of them are maybe doing manufacturing or something like that. How do you do that at scale, especially with the SOC? Like, do you have to customize to some extent, what you're delivering to each of these clients?
A little bit. The advantage, what we are kind of exploiting, is that there is the MSP sitting in the middle, right? They have the relationship with the customer, and we basically show up almost as an extension of the MSP itself. When we get an alert, for example, we will escalate that to the MSP, and we'll work with them however much they need our help to then make sure that they can remediate the problems for the end customer. So from the service delivery's perspective, there's not that much we have to adjust, because we just have to understand how to work with the MSP. From a threat detection perspective, it's a slightly different story, because there's regional banks, there's manufacturing, right? There's the automotive, there's like kind of the whole gamut of different types of businesses that we have to be able to protect. And I think the advantage that we bring to the table is that we have so many customers in the space with the MSPs that we have a really broad visibility into all kinds of different industries that we can help protect. So we do have a lot of regional banks, right? We have a lot of automotive, we have a lot of pharma, whatever it is in these different areas that we have a pretty good handle on what is actually happening. And maybe also slightly different in the enterprise space. You have much more targeted attacks, whereas in the MSP space, it's almost, that's kind of the industry you're looking at, right? That if the hackers go after an industry, if they go after the MSPs, they generally don't sub-select there and say, oh, MSPs that are delivering to bakeries or something like that, right? They're just like, we're going after the MSP, so we have a little bit of an advantage there.
And at your size, I assume, you're spread out, you've got MSPs in different countries and things like that. Maybe you have some in Europe and you have to worry about GDPR, how in different languages and things like that. How challenging is that from your standpoint? Have you gotten to that point where, the products and services you deliver have to be internationalized and you have to take different regulations into account?
Yeah, we're actually making a bigger effort this year to expand a little more internationally. We have a pretty good presence in Australia, New Zealand, and then in the UK and a little bit of the Nordics in Europe. Mostly English-speaking countries at this point, or at least businesses conducted in English. But the platform itself is internationalized so that we can translate to other languages, which is generally the easier part. But then when you're talking about service delivery, obviously language becomes a problem when you have people on the phone and things like that, right? And that's something we haven't scaled to yet, but it's something that probably during the later part of this year is actually a big initiative that we're running to see how we can expand a little more internationally and penetrate some of these other countries.
And then one more question.
As you can imagine, sorry, but it's like, if you look at a security operations center, to stand up, say, a German subsection or a team that speaks German, you need quite a lot of people to just stand up the bare minimum to deliver these services, right? Because you have 24/7 monitoring, and there's just a certain amount of people that you need, which can get interesting on the expense side, right?
Yeah, definitely. Just wanted to ask one more question, then I'll hand off to some of my co-hosts for them to ask some questions here. But with your background being heavily in the logging area, I remember a lot of the early MSPs and particularly MSSPs that I saw were very much built around a SIM, very, very much built around log data and things like that. We didn't quite have NDRs, and I mean, we had IDS, IPS back then, but there wasn't a whole lot of useful correlation. Now we've got NDR, we've got CSPMs, data coming from the cloud, we've got EDR. How much is that kind of driving? Like, is a lot of your roadmap also thinking about what are the new data sources that we need to include here for the visibility into the MSP's customers?
Yeah, it's if you look at the products and services we're delivering right now, it's very heavy on the EDR MDR side, right? Because it's a great tool to catch a lot of things, right? And if I would recommend one thing, it's probably install an endpoint protection tool in some way, right? Like lock that endpoint down. It's pretty easy to manage. These things can block, right? And then the other side is our SIM, that we work with a lot of MSPs to say, look, you got to have the endpoint covered, but on the SIM, we help you look at the network and all these other things that are floating around on your network you want to protect as well, right? Because they're often even more exposed than your managed endpoints, and things like robots and Arduinos and all kinds of stuff that are floating around the network are susceptible to be attacked, and you want to understand what they are. So the SIM is a great addition to that. And then in the last probably couple of years, cloud has become a very interesting topic, and it's even more SaaS than it's cloud itself, right? And I'm looking at sort of the SaaS applications everybody's using with the Dropbox and Workday and Salesforce and all that. We're putting more and more data in there, and we need to protect that. The cloud workloads for a subsection of the MSPs is very important. They're running Azure or AWS workloads or GCP that we have to help them protect to some degree. But generally, the MSP is a little more mature in that case, that they understand how to pull the logs out of there and put them into the SIM, and we'll help them with that. But then going forward, I'm constantly trying to understand what is top of the mind for the MSPs to help them, like in terms of where their businesses are going, and then help them secure these components and how to deliver a profitable business or a profitable service for them to the small businesses, right? What other tools do they need in the toolbox? And there's all kinds of different things that keep coming up, like SASE is a topic or Zero Trust Access is a topic that we just jumped into maybe 4 months ago. And it's a new topic for the MSPs. We have to do a lot of education and kind of guide them through. And that education goes beyond just telling them, hey, here's what SASE is and how Zero Trust works. But it's like, how do you make money with this thing, right? And how does it help you protect your customers better? That's always the two conversations that we help them with, which is very, very interesting to work with the MSPs. Again, just deliver security, but also help the MSP have a profitable business.
So I have a question that kind of follows on to that. So we do security assessments for customers across different industries. And one of the things that we've heard them mention is that oftentimes they will just use the EDR as their detection. So not so much a SIM, but the EDR platform and console as this is the thing that helps them understand what's going on in their environment, or if there's something bad that's happening. Others may send some security events, but not everything over to their SIM. And as you said, it gets complicated when you have cloud and these different applications, trying to tie all these together into a meaningful, useful way to understand what is really going on in their environment. So related to that, what are some of the biggest challenges that MSPs help solve for the customers? And I guess, in other words, why MSPs?
Yeah, look, I mean, if you take the bakery down the street, I always use bakeries as the example, right? They have some IT infrastructure. They have a cash register, like a point of sale, right? They have Wi-Fi network. They have a couple of computers where they do their accounting and things like that. They probably don't know much like about IT or security to start with, right? And for them, they already get these services delivered by someone, a technology service provider, right? Where they go to them and they install their wireless and their point of service and so on, or point of sale. If that MSP can now also provide them security, they're like, hey, look, we have an EDR deployed on your endpoint. We monitor the network, so the point of sale is also secured. Now, when something happens, the MSP will look and help understand what's going on. If an alert comes up, right, they will help them now figure out, okay, what do we have to do? Is this a false positive? Do we have to go in and do instant response in the worst case and get you back up and running? So they have a trusted partner for their IT and for their security services, right? That's why the MSP sits there and helps them being able to continue their business, right? That's really what it is, right?
Yeah, and I think there's Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of value there too, because one of the challenges that we certainly have seen, I mean, Active Directory has been around for 20 years now, and people coming out of college may not even know what Active Directory is or have heard of it. So certainly getting skilled folks that can work on these systems is challenging for all these different organizations that have systems that need to be managed. So managed service providers can kind of plug in those gaps, as you mentioned, where they can focus on their business instead of the core technology. One thing that's interesting to me around that is, are you seeing or hearing that MSPs are, well, it certainly sounds like they are handling more of the security operational tasks than just the strictly operations items that need to be done before, like maybe they were setting up users and getting things configured. Are you seeing and hearing that more of these tasks are security related, where they're implementing security standards, recommendations, maybe even doing remediation from, say, pen test reports and things like that?
It's the whole spectrum, right? We deal with MSPs that have pretty much zero security expertise. They lean on us to help them. They might just resell an EDR, right? And then something happens, our SOC looks at it, helps them figure out what to do. We have an incident response service. So if something really goes bad, we bring the incident response team in. To others that are super advanced, right? They go in, they start with a risk assessment. They run through questionnaires, they run some tools to understand what's happening in the customer base. They build a plan with them. Here's how we get you to a good security that makes sense for whatever industry you're working in, right? And the needs you have, and then provide the services. Often there's some MSPs that are just delivering security services. But what I see most of the time is that they will also provide some of the IT services, right? Like you said, they will manage the Active Directory and do the security around that as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like ConnectWise is kind of the MSP for MSPs, right? Where you're providing a lot of the capabilities that MSPs need, as you mentioned, billing and things like that. Is it effectively a framework that the MSP can leverage in order to enable them to provide these services to customers? Is that basically what you're saying around ConnectWise?
Yeah, it's literally some of our MSPs, they're using a lot of our products. Some are just on the business management side, like the PSA. Some are just security with us. But the biggest benefit for them is really when they start using multiple of our tools. Like I would say most of our security partner base actually has our PSA tool, which helps them with billing and things like that, and ticketing also. And you got to imagine, like, these MSPs, like, if they have that solution, they're literally sitting in front of this ticketing screen day in, day out, right? Their customers are sending tickets in, however, like email or call or whatever. They have their queue that they go through, they work through that. And one of the benefits we provide is that we have this platform that's super integrated. So where if there's an alert going off in the security tool, it will create a ticket in that ticketing system. So the technician doesn't have to jump around, learn multiple tools, look at multiple consoles to keep up to speed of what's going on. but it's all in this one place they can work through. And we're trying to give them more and more capabilities right in that ticket screen to do a lot of their work, right? Because for them, it's every minute spent on clicking around and switching consoles and having to understand what to do is a minute that they can't bill on work, right? So for them, automation is one of the biggest things that we can deliver for them and help them be more profitable, because that's now they have time to do other things and bring in more customers and deliver the services to more customers with the same amount of resources.
Right. So it sounds like automation at scale is a key part of this. And one of the things that we've seen in the industry is that automation or scaling is something that's incredibly useful to operations and something that's necessary for businesses to run. But we've also seen the other side of that, the attackers leveraging that automation, leveraging that scaling, certainly with the SolarWinds issue that happened a few years ago, where attackers are going after the supply chain. Certainly MSPs provide a really ripe target for attackers, from APTs to ransomware to crimeware, what have you, being able to hit a bunch of different targets at once. Maybe even that initial attack or attack component is who are our targets? Like, who did we get back from this? Right. What do you see as MSPs needing to do to best protect their customers or better protect their customers? And how is your company helping to solve this issue and enable them to ensure that there's better identity protection of who the MSP service providers are and which customers they're working with, to make sure that maybe the MSP isn't super overprivileged or have access to all their customers when they maybe just need to be working with a subset?
Yeah. So one of the key pieces for us is that we're not just going out there and like, hey, buy this from us and buy this and buy this and buy this, and we're going to help you sell this to your customers. A big piece for us is education. We have something we call the partner program, where we bring these MSPs in, and literally the first step is that we're working with them to get their own house in order. Because what you just said, we strongly believe you got to be secure yourself first, so that you can then deliver security services to your customers. So we'll help them assess where they stand, put a plan in place to get their security beefed up so that they're more secure, and then they can go out and actually also leverage what they just learned and then bring that to their customers. So that is a crucial piece. In addition, through this partner program also, we are helping the MSPs figuring out what is the right stack, what is the right mix of products and services to bring to their customers. Because and it's kind of scary, because generally the stack is about 10 different products and services that they assemble and then sell out to their customers, right? Because if you were to think about what are the top tools that you need, or the top services that you need to secure an SMB, well, there's security awareness training you probably want to put in there somehow, probably kind of like tied in with maybe phishing simulation, right? You want to have something on the endpoint protection. You probably want to do something in the network protection as well. You have your SaaS applications. You probably want to do something on vulnerability management and patching. So the stack gets big quite quickly, but we help the MSPs figure out, okay, what is the right stack? And this is not just our own tools and services, but we're bringing third-party tools in there. We have a whole marketplace and an ecosystem where we pull, say, the email solution in, right? And say, look, here's a good stack you should have for your expertise and for where you are and what you want to do. Then we help them go and sell that to their customers and implement it. So it's that whole life cycle really that we're trying to work with them on.
And I appreciate that. Sorry, I just wanted to jump in real quick, and I appreciate that. Sure. But I think really the key to what I'm wondering here is, what are some of the things that MSPs could do a better job at, or what are some of the things that they could configure in order to ensure that their customers are protected against these sort of attacks?
Yeah, like I think you can hook in anywhere you want, right? Like as I mentioned earlier, some of these MSPs, they're not the big wizards on understanding Active Directory or whatever other tools that they have deployed with their customers, right? Some of them are they host servers and services for their customers, and it's the same problems that you have across the board, that you make sure that these things are secure, right? So following guidelines, following the CIS benchmarking guidelines is something that we work with these MSPs a lot. Like, hey, here's a framework you can go through. You should really hit all these different things to make sure that you're up to standard on protecting the infrastructure that you're operating, right? And so I think it's probably that's where it starts. Pick the right framework and implement these controls to make sure that you're following some kind of a prescribed way of securing things, right? Like just going in and kind of like, oh, here's a hardening guideline for this, and here's another recommendation for that, and just kind of like doing pieces here and there is not going to get us secure, right? It's just like everywhere else. In a large company, you have a security program. Same here. Implement a security program where you go back to some of these standards and frameworks and implement that for yourself, and then implement that with your customers.
So I have a question for you, Rafi. I think it's pretty obvious that SMBs, the MSPs that provide services to SMBs benefit from a single tool that pulls together as a platform a lot of these separate sub markets, where your larger enterprises can afford to go ahead and buy all these point solutions, cobble them together with glue, with their own security engineering teams, build their own SOCs, et cetera, where there's so much more value for an MSP to find a single tool or a smaller subset of tools. When rolling that out to the customer, not the MSP, but when rolling out those types of solutions to the customer, what's the biggest hang up that you find that the small to mid-sized business struggles with when deploying either a suite of tools or a single tool in the case of your company?
Well, that's a good question. I think one of the challenges we see every now and then is that, okay, say take EDR, right? Endpoint protection. It's easy to have here's a binary that you have to install on every machine. But how do you actually do that, right? With the detail of, okay, you got to get to every machine, you have to deploy it, make sure it's running, keep it up and running. It actually takes time, right? That if you have a company of 100 people to get that rolled out. Now, hopefully the MSP has some kind of a software management tool installed so they can push these things down, right? But often they will lack that. And so while the goal might sound very simple, deploy endpoint protection on all the machines you can, to actually implement that, the project to do that is often pretty complex and takes quite a while to make sure you actually have the coverage, and then you want to monitor and make sure that these things actually stay up to date. And that's all these different areas where we see these challenges where there's a lot of manual work potentially involved, is where we obviously then see opportunity to come in and help with certain tools. In some cases we have them, in some cases like, oh my God, we got to put this on the roadmap and develop some kind of these things.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I've definitely found that the end consumer struggles with different things like lack of resources, like as you mentioned, right? What's interesting to me, though, is that so many companies sell to MSPs and then leave it to the MSP to figure out how to best serve the end consumer of the product, in this case, the SMB. And what I'm imagining and hearing is that folks like yourselves and the leaders in these areas have education, have professional services, have ways of helping the MSP to deliver that value appropriately to the end buyer. And really, at the end of the day, what we need is the end buyer to say, hey, I struggle with X. Help me figure out X, right? And it sounds like it's generally a lack of resources scale problem that most small to mid-sized businesses will struggle with.
100%. And our partner program is, we spend a lot of resources and efforts in developing it and expanding it, and it costs us quite a bit of money. But in the end, that's also where we make a lot of money back, because if the MSPs are successful, they will sell more. Well, they will sell more of our stuff, right? And that has worked really well for us. And I don't think you cannot really sell to the MSP space if you don't have a component of education, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I had some kind of follow-up questions. Again, we've talked a lot about the tech stack and how you decide what that tech stack is going to be, but I'm kind of curious about the kinds of conversations you have with customers? Are most just happy to let you, well, and when I say customers, talking about your customers and your customers' customers, are most of them pretty hands-off, happy to let you be the expert on here's what you need, here's how it should work, we'll operate this stuff for you? Or, I'm sure in some cases the MSPs are a bit more hands-on with configuration and operation of some of that stuff. But do you also have conversations where, like, I assume that's some of it, but do you also have conversations where you get pushback, where people are like, why don't you have this? I saw an article about this new shiny thing, when are you adding that to the stack? And you have to push back and say, actually, we don't think there's a lot of value in that. Basically you have to tell them no nicely. Is that a common conversation? Yeah. or is that rare, where you have to kind of push back and say, yeah, no, it's not worth the squeeze on that one?
Hey, all the time. And that's what I'm seeking out as well, right? Because we all have our blinders on when we're doing things, right? I have mine on. I see a certain segment of my partner base that we work with all the time, but I can't ever talk to all 6,000 of them, right? And they have different needs. So I'm relying on them coming and saying, hey, we need a way to help. Like, we need to be able to monitor Azure Active Directory or Azure this and that, or how do we monitor our Amazon instances from a network perspective, right? Like, we get into the weeds of some of these things fairly quickly and quite often, and I'm relying on my MSPs to push back and ask and challenge, right? Because only that way can we make sure that we deliver the right services to help them grow their business. In the end, they're my customer. They're dictating where things are going, right? If there's new technology coming up that they're starting to having to support, well, we have to help them secure it, right? It's just like everywhere else as well. If there and like one of the other big examples is regulation, right? Like, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of education needed on, well, what are the things you have to deliver for XYZ regulation? What frameworks should we use to address these things? And then you get scares again when the government puts out some kind of executive order that says, here's what MSPs need to do, or certain guidelines, right? So that there's constant conversation happening with the MSPs.
Yeah. How much of a heart attack did you have when the White House said zero trust?
Fortunately, we have a zero trust solution in our stack, so I can just say, go there, right? Which obviously doesn't just solve all the problems, but it's some of these things help, just having the conversation and keeps us re-engaged with our partner base. They're like, hey, we just saw this. What does this mean? How can you help us make sense of this stuff, right? So we're trying to be their advisor on these kinds of things as well.
And then my next question is kind of around, obviously the goal is to make everybody secure all the time to prevent breaches. But when you get to the scale that you're at with the number of customers that you have and the customers that those companies have, breaches are going to be inevitable. So I'm kind of curious, like, how you have that conversation around that sensitive topic. Like, I imagine attackers are now thinking, hey, if I can target and attack an MSP instead of attacking individual customers, if I can compromise an entire MSP, then that's a lot more folks I can ransom. I can really benefit from scale on the attack side there. So is that a conversation that you have, like, when you onboard MSPs? You say, hey, if something happens, here's how we're going to handle it. Is there a playbook for that? I know it's maybe a sensitive topic, but I've got to imagine it's inevitable once you get to a certain scale.
You're painting a target on my back right now, whatever I'm going to say. It's a great question. When we onboard a new customer for an MSP even, or just an MSP, we obviously have the conversation on our service level objectives, right? Like, what are we escalating? What are the things you want to hear from us? So we sit down, we define, here's the alerts. Here's how we set up your EDR. Here's how we set up the SIM. Here's the things we're monitoring. Here's what we escalate to you. And then you get into the agreement of what we deliver versus what the MSP then is responsible for to then go and investigate further. There's only a certain amount of things we can do. So if you are a SIM customer of ours, then, well, I can only do whatever I see in my data. We are not going to log into systems and go pull more evidence and things like that. That we draw the line there, right? Because that would open us to certain other challenges that we don't want to cross that line. But we can have the SLA with the MSP say, hey, you got to look at the systems. Here's what we need you to look for. Go do this now. And then in certain cases when we're like, hey, you got a breach right now, here you got to go and act. We have an incident response service where they can say, we need help, bring the cavalry, and we come in and help remediate the problems, right? So there's constant conversations, and what we need to do is we need to make sure that we are adhering to the SLO that we set up with the MSP, and we constantly make sure that we're on top of that. We're tuning our systems, and that's the delivery that we do on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, and I the reason I asked the question, I don't want to paint a target on your back, but I think it's unhealthy and kind of naive to have this, this assumption that, I've outsourced my responsibility and my risk to this other company, and I like that you frame it, the way you have that conversation is as, shared responsibility, much like the cloud service providers do. I think most people are familiar with that, the shared responsibility model, the fact that there's some things they can do for you and, other things that they just can't, there's limitations there. I think,
I probably didn't answer the piece that people are always interested in, which is the scale, right? Like you asked, well, are the attackers going after the MSP and compromise their infrastructure? Now they have access to all their customers. Well, imagine it's just like a large organization, right? The MSP probably even has less endpoints in the end than, say, a JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or someone like that, right? So you could obviously attack the AD of the MSP that they might be using for a lot of their customers, but often AD is even segregated for most of their customers. They have an individual AD instance. So the scale you're going to get to is actually not that much bigger than if you're going after one of the big ones directly, right? So I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's just it's something we have to get out there. It's something everybody's thinking about, right? Like especially after a couple of these high, very visible incidents have happened. So, it's obviously a discussion you have to have, and I think it's better for us to get it out there than to pretend, I've hired a company to do all that stuff for me and I don't have to worry about it. And I think it's interesting that happens at two levels here, not only the small business, but the MSP itself, to some extent, they can't totally sleep on their responsibility when it comes down to securing their own stuff.
Yeah.
Even though they've got your tech stack and that's great, but still, they've got to make sure they do their part.
Right. Absolutely.
Awesome. And with that, Rafi, I think that's a great place to end. I thank you so much for this conversation, for all the answers here. I think we've learned a lot about how this works and and some of the current trends. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk about detecting breaches in applications and why every security team needs data science with Jim Routh. managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management. Trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join our Discord channel to chat with our hosts, ask questions during the live stream, customize live stream alerts, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Discord to receive an invite. All right, for our next interview, Jim Routh. Jim Routh joins us today. Sorry, just learning to say people's names. Sometimes my brain doesn't work with me. Jim Routh joins us today to talk about detecting breaches in applications and why every security team needs data science expertise. Fascinating topic that I'm looking forward to getting into. Jim is currently on many boards, but today is representing RevealSecurity, a company focused on detecting attackers and malicious insiders in business applications. Jim is also a boardroom survivor, bearing the CISO mantle for over 20 years of his career. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate it. Great to be here.
Yeah, and just maybe we can start there and talk a little bit about what it's like living that CISO role. I know a lot of your time in the CISO role was very early days, and maybe the CISO role is very different today, but yeah, you've had some very long tenures in terms of how long folks typically stay in a CISO role, and some very short ones. So I'm kind of interested in what makes a good pairing, I guess, in a CISO role. On the Business Security Weekly podcast, Jason Albuquerque is always talking about his 5 C's. The 5 things he looks for that, if it doesn't mesh, then the CISO role isn't going to work out for him. And their culture, communication, which is access to the C-suite or whatever access you need, coffers, which is a bit of a reach, I think, for that one, but it refers to budget, compensation, and then compliance, whether or not it's just a check mark to them or they actually take some of this stuff seriously. So curious about your thoughts there.
Yeah, so there's a lot that we can talk about. So the first is, in my experience, about 70% of the people that interview CISOs have no idea how to interview a CISO or what they're looking for in a CISO. That puts a particular burden and pressure on the CISO candidate. And what the CISO needs to do is to understand, going into an opportunity, how much transformational leadership is required or requested. And that may be 2 different things, which in of itself is a bit of an indicator. So, for example, there could be a organization that says, hey, we got a really good, mature security function. We have good talent in the security department. And look, we're just trying to get through the next few years managing tight budgets. So we want efficiency and effectiveness in just status quo. And that's one level, probably the minimal level of transformational leadership. And then there's, we got some really significant problems in our cybersecurity function. We'd like you to rebuild the function and acquire and develop talent at a higher level than what we've done in the past. We need to change how the cybersecurity team interacts with the rest of the enterprise. There's been a lot of problems and challenges, turnover, et cetera. So that's like a heavy transformational mandate, but it's within the realm of the cybersecurity function or organization. And then there's the end of the spectrum is, we'd like to achieve cyber resilience across the enterprise. Not entirely sure what that means, but it means different behaviors for every employee in our enterprise. And so that's a fundamental transformational shift. And we want you to play a role in that in terms of the leadership responsibility. So the CISO has to kind of figure out what the expectations are and then what the requirements are. And hopefully there's some alignment there And if there is, the likelihood for longer tenure goes up because the expectations are a little bit better understood and managed along the way. So, right off the bat, figuring out what kind of transformational appetite the requirements are, and then what's being asked for is one of the factors in longevity. The other is that, and this is different today, getting to one of your questions versus what it was. When I started as a CISO, it was 20 years ago. And my first two CISO gigs, one was at American Express and the second was at Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. And in both cases, I made a fundamental error that many first-time CISOs make. And what I did is I met the expectations of my stakeholders. And my stakeholders were the CEO and the CEO direct reports, essentially the executive leadership team in both cases. And when I say I made a fundamental mistake, it's because my assumption was I had to meet those expectations. What I really should have been doing, but nobody sat me down and told me this beforehand, so I had to learn it the hard way. What I should have been doing was managing those expectations, not meeting them. And I'll be specific. I naturally fell into the role of a subject matter expert. Why? Well, I knew more about cybersecurity than my stakeholders. And that's
you became irreplaceable? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think what happened is that the leaders delegated the decision to the subject matter expert, but they really weren't totally bought into the outcome of the decision-making process. They're kind of like, yeah, well, what does the newbie say? And, okay, well, we'll give that a whirl and see how that works out for a while. And so what happened is budget pressure or market pressure or business pressure kind of eroded the decisions that I thought were kind of cast in stone, because largely they were delegated to the subject matter expert and they weren't really consensus. And that really gets back to what today I think is a premium skill that adds to longevity for a CISO in a cybersecurity role. And that is being able to facilitate consensus of the senior business leaders. And that's a skill that requires the CISO not to be a subject matter expert, because to facilitate consensus effectively, you have to be unbiased. You can't be opinionated on a particular outcome of a decision. You have to facilitate the team coming to consensus and using other subject matter experts, perhaps, but playing the role of demonstrating neutrality. And that's a skill set that the CISOs are not ingrained with in coming up the ranks. And so first-time CISOs are very often stuck in a mode of being the subject matter expert. And unfortunately, it's a painful lesson, but that's not effective to drive long-term tenure. And once I kind of mastered that, I had a lot more success and was able to stay, in my position for until I wanted to change versus anyone else.
That's fascinating. And I often wonder, like when I see, someone take a CISO role and not have a background in security, I wonder if that benefits them. Like I've seen HR professionals laterally move into a CISO role with having no security background. I've seen general counsel make that lateral move into the CISO role. And I've often thought, especially for financial firms, maybe somebody with 20 years in loss prevention might make a good CISO, because they already have that, good handle on how they think about risk. But yeah, what you just shared is not something I had really considered. But I think it's definitely, I think shifts that kind of thought of the CISO career path. Where I think a lot of people kind of think of it as like an eventual goal, like to move through all this technical stuff and then you graduate to CISO, but I think a lot of people that get to that point that have that path through security tend to be very unsatisfied in the CISO role and find themselves very frustrated.
It turns out that stakeholder expectation management is a learned and practiced skill that you have to practice to learn. And well, that means you got to experience it. You got to try out different techniques. You have to adjust. You have to adapt. And you really don't get to exercise that skill set unless you're either a BISO or a CISO. So you can study techniques. You can certainly retool yourself in terms of being more knowledgeable. But what works for you in the context of consensus building and facilitation, that's something you have to practice, make mistakes at, adjust, and learn how to apply. And so I'd say that skill today is really a premium for successful CISOs. I don't think you get it just by coming up the ranks as a leader. I think there are some nuances for dealing both with executive leaders and board members. You got to practice that to learn and apply and master the skills.
And just for folks, when Jim says BISOs, and my knowledge isn't extensive here, but my understanding is a BISO is when you have an organization so large that individual parts of the business need their own kind of, product line CISOs. Like it's just too much for one central CISO to handle all that stuff and to dive into the necessary details there. Is that about right?
It is about right. There are cases where it's not so much size that dictates it, but sometimes a business, for instance, a subsidiary might be in a totally different business
market,
with a different market, different attack surface. And so there can be a lot of unique attributes or characteristics to a part of the business that warrant someone that's focused on the business objectives for that business and the priorities in terms of cybersecurity, which may be fundamentally different than the larger enterprise. So there are some other reasons for having BISOs, not just size and scope, but size and scope is certainly one of them.
Yeah. So one more question before we kind of shift to analytics and data science and the makeup of security teams and what they focus on. Do you have any CISO survival tips, like staying in the job a long time, or maybe recommendations on books to read or anything to put someone in the frame of mind that you're describing here? Anything that really kind of made it click for you? That somebody can maybe pick up and read.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question in terms of tenure. I typically talk to CISOs about survival, and survival is like survival like till tomorrow or till maybe next week, and that's as far as we look forward. But your question is really like looking out a little bit longer term. What are some of the things to think about? One thing comes to mind right off the bat, and that is, and I've seen this time and time again, you have a leader who you're reporting to, who essentially, is your sponsor, if you will, within the company. And it's a good idea to cultivate sponsorship that's outside of the chain of command with your leader. So ideally a peer of your leader, or just someone that's in a different function, not tied to cybersecurity. And what you want to do is cultivate that sponsorship relationship. Now, what does a sponsor do? Well, the primary thing that a sponsor does is a sponsor has your back when you're not in the room. So when there are critical meetings and decisions being made and you're not part of that process, which is common, then you want someone in the room that's at least looking out for your interests and has your back and will defend you or support you as needed. And if you have more than one of those sponsorship relationships, you're likely for a longer tenure simply because if you report to the CIO and the CIO leaves after 18 months, you got a new CIO, and that person stays for 2 years, and then you have another CIO. All of the change of leadership that's normal in any kind of organization that that's dealing with growth, it leaves you vulnerable. And you're in transition for new leaders, and sometimes your job is to help your new leader get acclimated, oriented to their job, and that's the primary focus. Having relationships with multiple sponsors can insulate you a bit, and at least provide a level of support during transition that will add to your longevity as a CISO. So it's not something that's widely discussed, but cultivating sponsorship outside of your chain of command can really help you weather the storm, and frankly, be part of the positive transformational change underway when leaders change roles.
So it sounds like the politics are unavoidable. Basically what I'm hearing is watch House of Cards on Netflix and take notes.
When there's people, they're politics. And the more people, the more intense the politics. And that's true of any organization in any industry in any form, shape, or fashion.
But yeah, good advice. You can't throw everybody, in that room when you're having those conversations under the bus, and hope to keep that roll along. But totally makes sense. I'm glad you shared that. But yeah, let's kind of shift over to the headline topic here, which is analytics and data science. So first off, you're on the board of a lot of companies, but today we're kind of particularly talking about some of the stuff that you're doing with RevealSecurity. And I understand what Reveal does is they're kind of focused on insider threat. Is that correct?
It is correct. That's one of the things. They're really focused on using application log data to identify anomalistic behavior, and to do that in an implementation model that's not reliant upon high skill and high technology, or lots of intensive technology. So to make it easier for enterprises to use this. I'm going to give you a bit of some context for that that I think will be helpful. I have a strong belief in this. I've been doing it for 10 years, doing it. What I mean is applying data science to cybersecurity. And I believe that data science is foundational to cybersecurity, any cybersecurity program of size and scale going forward, which is not a widely held belief, but it is one that has stood the test of time for me. So the first person I hired back when I was at Aetna as CISO was a chief data scientist dedicated to cybersecurity. First person I hired at MassMutual was chief data scientist dedicated to cybersecurity. And so building a data science capability and team within my organization, or as part of my organization, or partnered with the data science team in the enterprise, doesn't really matter. What matters is you have a focused set of data science practitioners that are interested in learning the cybersecurity domain and making contributions. And the basis for that really started from what we've learned in the last dozen or so years from the FBI doing criminal interrogations. And so what they learned, and they've applied successfully going forward, is you can actually tell when people are lying in an interview by reading micro expressions, they're called, that are, right? You've heard this. A lot of people have heard this. Right?
What's his name that put together that book? It's called What Everybody Is Saying. Everybody.
Yes. I don't remember his name, but I know exactly what you're referring to.
He has a bunch of like gambling books, like Looking for Tells and stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah. It can be used. That's your point. It can kind of be used in a number of circumstances. But here's the principle. The principle is that body language doesn't lie. That's the principle, right? And we see that intuitively. It's unconscious behavior. It's exactly right. And so we see that in communication. And it turns out when you're online, when anyone is online, that your online actions and behaviors are telling. And they're telling in this regard. They either are part of an established pattern or not. And the beauty is that we can measure behavior that's part of an established pattern, or if it's not, we can measure how far it deviates from that pattern. We can represent that mathematically. We learn this in statistics or in geometry. You learn that any data elements can be presented on a graph, XY axis, and represented numerically. So if we can turn it into numbers, turns out computers can do a lot with numbers. And so if we can cluster events in a range that represents a pattern, and then we can look at real-time events, compare it to the pattern, and find deviation. And when we find that deviation, we measure that deviation, and so we can establish a threshold that triggers automation or automated workflow when that threshold is reached. So when the behavioral deviation reaches a high enough level, we can trigger an action. Now, everything I've just described, we can do in milliseconds with the compute technology that we have available. So it eliminates the need for data around a security event to be presented to a SOC analyst, as an example. The SOC analyst has to collect other data to put context around that event, and then decide on the outcome. Do I treat it this way or that way, or what's the action that's necessary to take? And then they have to execute and take that action, and that takes time and effort. That's just the nature of a cybersecurity professional, right? So, but if we can measure deviation of behavior and then trigger automated response, we can do all of that in milliseconds. And essentially, now what we have is a way of designing frontline security controls that operate in real time at scale and never impact negatively the humans involved in cybersecurity. In fact, the humans can step back, look at the transactions, and do analysis and cyber hunting that they never had the capability to do before, because it's a frontline control. So in cybersecurity, specifically in identity access management, there are many hundreds of use cases that can operate with this very simple pattern, this very simple idea and construct. Now, it's a little bit more difficult to build models that allow you to use streaming data to trigger the automated actions and build out the infrastructure to do that. And you need some technical engineering skill. You need some data science skill, machine learning, algorithm development skill. So there's skills that you need. The point is that we can buy software today that does that for us and is relatively easy and straightforward to implement. Reveal is a great example of that. And there are other choices that we have as well. And those choices are increasing in terms of those that have products and capabilities using ML today in real time. If we have an EDR solution today across our enterprise, and if you're using any of the top 4 EDR vendors, they're all using machine learning algorithms that that are behavioral based, essentially, to try to identify threats to the enterprise. And so more and more product capability. Go ahead.
There's 2 things there I want to speak to before we dive any further into this. The first is I love, first of all, the idea of, bringing data science into security totally makes sense. Security has tons of data, and most of the folks in security don't have a background in data science. They don't necessarily understand what's possible with that data. What kind of insights you can pull out of it, what you can do with that data. How you can pull out important insights and like you said, find some opportunities to automate things. That just wouldn't occur to the normal person. Like I remember once working with somebody, like I heard this rhythmic sound coming from somebody else's cubicle. And it was somebody that was just trying to clean up data in a spreadsheet, but across like thousands of rows. And they were just like doing the same operation thousands of times. I was like, hey, stop. Let me show you how macros work. right? Like, you can create a macro to do that, and it'll do it. It'll take you like 60 seconds to write, to record the macro, and then, a fraction of a second for your computer to do all that for you, instead of you getting RSI doing this manually. But yeah, I just want to call this out because this is something Andy Ellis talks about a lot, who also a 20-year CISO, where he came to the realization, look, if I want to build a report, why would I take somebody who's an expert at writing exploits and using Metasploit and stuff and throw them into a writing gig? No, I'm going to hire a journalist to do that. So he hired a journalist to do that. I need to train employees on security awareness and stuff like that. Why would I take somebody with a security background to do that? I'm going to hire a teacher and have a teacher take that role. So I think, this is like, not that the talent problem is imagined. Like obviously we do have some skill sets that don't exist in the quantity that we need, but then we've got other skill sets where there are people out there looking for jobs that would love to take these roles and are much better picks for it than somebody with a security background. So I love the idea of bringing somebody with data science experience in. But then the second thing I wanted to touch on is the importance for both sides to work together. There needs to be a relationship between somebody with security background and somebody with that data science background, because I've worked with a lot of data science scientists who don't have that security background, so they can't judge when the data that they're looking at is trash, is bad data, it's not good quality data, or they can't rely on certain things in the data. Like say you're taking data with that's going to be false positive heavy, data from an IDS, for example. They need to understand that a large quantity of that data is not going to be terribly useful before they start building models around it.
Absolutely right. So the one ingredient that's necessary for this to work is to make sure that your cybersecurity professionals have an appetite and a hunger for learning. The second is to make sure your data scientists have a hunger for learning. If you could do those two things, that makes it work, because data scientists actually like extending other domain expertise. They like growing domains that they're proficient in, and they recognize that there's a learning curve associated to do that, but they have incentive to do that to build their portfolio. Cybersecurity professionals really should have a high appetite to learn, because threat actors change their tactics all the time. You have to adjust. So to be successful long-term in cybersecurity, you have to be really interested in retooling, because it's a requirement. Yeah, definitely. There's a good book. It's called Algorithms to Live By, and we love a good book here. Have both data scientists and cybersecurity people read the book. If they love the book, they have the propensity to be a data scientist. If they like the book, they have the propensity to use data science fundamentals in what they do. If they hate the book, then if they're a cybersecurity professional, they have to be friends with data scientists. So just by reading the book, you can kind of figure out in those three outcomes.
All right, we got two books that are required reading coming out of this podcast so far. Sean, did you have any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jim, you have a lot of experience as a CSO, CISO, working in companies across industries, including companies with large environments. I'm really curious to hear some of the challenges that you had to deal with, given those environments and the size of those environments, as far as ones that were solvable, that took some time, maybe some collaboration among teams. And what are some of the big challenges that still need good solutions that you see that are out there?
Yeah, actually, Sean, that's a great question, because I'll give you one example. When I was at JP Morgan Chase, I was responsible for software security globally. And so I did a count of where all of the developers and where they were around the globe. And there were 19,500 developers. And so I had to figure out how teach them how to use static analysis and dynamic scanning and adjust the SDLC regardless of what technology platform they were working on. And I had to, do a little bit of missionary work in trying to get them to be somewhat receptive to cybersecurity. This is, probably a decade or longer ago. So, today, fortunately, developers are a lot more receptive to applying security practices, really just to create more resilient code. And they're much more knowledgeable about cybersecurity implications today than back then. But the point I'm making is that when you're a CISO or when you're a senior, leader in cybersecurity, the choice of the techniques not only have to be applicable to the desired outcome that you're looking for, but they have to be scalable across a big enterprise. And so the more complex the message, the more difficult it is to implement. The simpler the message, the easier it is to implement. And easy is probably not a word that belongs in a large scale enterprise. So when you're dealing with an enterprise of 300,000 employees, the techniques that you choose and how you implement those techniques is more important than whether you're focused on the right risks. It turns out that some practices that are scalable in a 100-person organization or enterprise, don't work at all in a 10,000-person enterprise. And so you actually have to change and adjust the selection of techniques and how they're implemented based on the size and scale of the enterprise, or you're not going to have any impact in influencing the outcome. And the only difference in a large organization is when there's a security breach, the business impact is large as well, because it's a large enterprise with a lot of customers or a lot of customer data or what have you. So scaling the choice of techniques that you use, it's not as simple as knowing what the problem is, knowing what the solution set is, and then just going and implementing it. The actual implementation is far more intricate and far more challenging in a large scale enterprise. And frankly, it takes a little bit longer to implement as well.
Do you have any examples of something like that might work at a 100-person startup but not work in a large enterprise?
Yeah, so it's funny you say that, because let's just say a 100-person enterprise, and let's say you get 15 IT people that are trying to stand up some cloud services and some local infrastructure. If you look at asset inventory, IT asset inventory, if they're using a spreadsheet to track their asset inventory and they're identifying the configuration standard, if that's even a term that's used, but the configuration of each of the devices, and they're tracking on a spreadsheet, that actually works pretty well. And the irony is that when you get to 1,000-person enterprise or a 10,000 person enterprises, supported with devices and infrastructure, that doesn't work so well. That spreadsheet, even with macros, Adrian, the spreadsheet doesn't work quite as well in terms of maintaining an asset inventory and having some sort of standardization. And so you have to throw technology, really automation, at that problem to do that well. And of course, IT hygiene is a foundation for cybersecurity in any size organization. So you have to use some automation capability that lends itself to scalability for larger size enterprises. And in some cases, smaller size enterprises doing things kind of seat of the pants are okay. It's why startups go through that phase. And there's always a reckoning at some point where they have to put more automation into the normal execution process of running their business, because it's just not standardized enough. There's too many variabilities. And that causes both security vulnerabilities, but it also causes, IT outages that eventually you want to grow out of.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I know you've got a hard stop at 4:30, so we I think Sean has one more question, and then we'll let you go and make sure we don't keep you too long.
Absolutely, thanks, Adrian.
Appreciate that.
So there's a lot of talk about scale. Certainly, you've mentioned scale several times, and the importance of scale for business to work, right? And we've seen some things that help with scale. We've seen cloud, and we've seen the benefits of cloud, some challenges with cloud, but we've also seen blockchain being thrown around as a potential solution to solve problems. And now we're kind of on the cusp of what AI could potentially do for us. What do you see as where blockchain and AI may be helpful or not as we move forward over the next 5 to 10 years plus?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's kind of forces us kind of look forward a bit. So blockchain is, I don't put it in the same category league as AI, because and AI, you mentioned we're at the cusp of kind of leveraging that. We're well beyond the cusp. So I worked at enterprises, I don't know, 8 years ago, that they might have had close to 1,000 machine learning algorithms running in production at the time. I know when I was at Aetna, we had somewhere around 300 machine learning algorithms driving frontline cybersecurity controls. And we were just a very small part of the overall enterprise data science capability that was deployed in production. So many, many data intensive enterprises, financial services, healthcare entities today have machine learning algorithms driving production data as a norm. And so we're just going to see more and more of this for all the obvious reasons of productivity and effectiveness going forward. What we're also going to see is what we've seen kind of with Microsoft introducing AI into their search engine. We're going to see lots of cases where it doesn't work, and lots of cases where the models are either biased or wrong. And so we, as enterprises, have to get more disciplined in how we create machine learning algorithms to ensure that they're not biased and to ensure that they're doing the right thing. And that's a people function. That will never be a technology function or automation. That's a people function. Have to do that. We have to use judgment in how we do that. We have to make sure that the machine learning algorithms that we create to put in production are actually secure or can't be changed with bad test data. So there's a resiliency factor that goes into the models that's security related, and we have to improve the tools that we have available to do that, to test the efficacy of the models from a security standpoint as well as from a bias perspective. So I see that growing exponentially. Blockchain has a place, but I don't think it's as transformative as what we've read about and learned about for the last 5 or 6 years. I think that AI is clearly a fundamental shift, and I think cloud is a fundamental IT transformational shift that is predominant across enterprises. I think blockchain has places where it fits, but I don't see it as revolutionary in terms of changing technology to the scale that both AI is and cloud computing is.
Yeah, I think we're in full agreement on that, Jim. We've it's come up a lot, especially when we do a news segment. But Andreessen Horowitz keeps pumping money into it, so maybe we're wrong. I don't know.
We'll see. Time will tell.
Indeed. Jim, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. It was a great conversation. Hit a lot of topics. I think all great. Yeah.
Sean, Adrian, thank you. I appreciate it, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news. Attackers are only getting more proficient, so how can you proactively adapt your cybersecurity strategy? Core Security by Fortra helps you uncover and prioritize the risks that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Core Impact is a penetration testing tool that safely finds and exploits vulnerabilities using the same techniques as attackers. You can conduct advanced pen tests with ease using certified exploits and automation. Take your engagements further by pairing with our red teaming tools from Cobalt Strike and Outflank. Learn more at www.securityweekly.com/core security. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover in one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions monthly and will reach out to you once reviewed. And I have cleared out that queue, so it is empty. Go ahead and fill it up. We get a lot of good guest suggestions that way. All right, now time for the news. You can go to securityweekly.com/ESW307 if you want to follow along as we go through the news. There, we took a week off last week, and the week before that. So to make room to talk about Space Rogue and his new book release. It was just too perfect. It was we were able to have him on right on the day that book was released. So we decided not to do news that week. Then we had a holiday week. And so now we've got 3 weeks worth of stuff. We got 48 items. So make sure you check out securityweekly.com/ESW307. We will not get to all of these. And there's some really, really good ones in the show notes here. So kicking off, I thought for sure that Wiz was going to be on the top of the funding list this week, but it seems that Google spinoff Sandbox AQ, which is apparently post-quantum cryptography startup that's been spun out of Google, has hit the top of the list with a $500 million, what is it, a seed? What is this?
$500 million seed.
Just spending money just to... so nobody starves.
Oh my gosh, that's so wild. When I saw the news come through for Wiz 300 at 10 billion valuation, I was positive that's going to be the biggest one of the year. I was like, there's no way, like in this down market. And then this guy pops up for quantum of all things.
The nerve.
You're right. I don't even understand quantum. I'm sorry. I'm either really stupid, which is quite probable, or this stuff is just way beyond me. I just don't understand quantum. We need to do a show on quantum.
I have one planned. I've actually already picked the interviews. We're going to have an interview with somebody to just explain quantum computing in general to us. What can it do? What can it do? And then we're going to have another guest explain what quantum means to security. And from what I've gathered so far from doing my research here, and I'm really looking forward to scheduling those guests and having them on, is for some cryptography, it's a big deal. For other cryptography, it's not. And I think it's symmetric versus asymmetric. I go any deeper, I'm way out of my depth. So we'll have to have some experts.
My understanding is the ones that have one-way hash algorithms, one-way trapdoor algorithms, I think. And please, I'm sure there's some audience member out there who's going to be like, Tyler, you're an idiot, and send me comments. Please go ahead. But I think it's the ones that have the one-way trapdoor, the single direction functions that you have to really brute force in a certain way that are quantum at risk with quantum. But again, I don't understand quantum computing. Even at the fundamental levels of even what it is, I would love to get down to that level of analysis, because Google spinning off, or Alphabet spinning off a $500 million seed-backed cyber quantum company is something I should understand. I either should understand it, or it's so insane that no one will ever understand it.
Well, I mean, it's good that they're getting into it now before quantum computers get to the level to where, because IBM is, I think they're at like 48 qubits now, and they're expecting thousands of qubits in the near future. So this stuff is sounds like it's going to take off pretty quick. It's going to advance pretty quick. So we might be there before anybody thinks. Kind of like what happened with AI. Like most of us weren't really tracking AI.
AI didn't take off quick, Adrian. Let's be real about AI. AI was here for 10 years before it all of a sudden took off quickly.
Right, but I don't think anybody was prepared for what ChatGPT could do when they opened that up. Like that was the first service to go from 0 to 100 million people using it in like 3 months or something like that. I think it took Facebook like 3 years to do that, or 10 years. I forget what it was.
But again, how many years of useless, failed AI experiments that couldn't figure out how to apply themselves in any useful way had to happen for over a decade or more for that moment of clarity. I wonder if quantum, in its fundamental, whatever the hell it is, state that I don't understand, is a similar problem where it's just going to need to marinate for a decade or longer before we have the aha moment.
Well, the great thing about planning a episode on quantum, and it means that because of quantum theory, because we plan it, then it already happens. So I think that'll work out well for us, Adrian.
Nice.
I love it.
Nicely played. Nicely played.
So we 100% have to talk about Wiz, though, about the raise that is Wiz, the $300 million on $10 billion valuation. We can't just skip that for quantum discussion, but holy smokes, that raise blew my mind this week. What's your take on it, Adrian?
Yeah, so I've been talking about this a lot because so this is a company extremely rare. Shared their revenue number last August, said they were already to $100 million ARR, which is nuts considering they came out of stealth like not long ago. I think this is one of these where we were talking about how do you even hire that many employees that quick? How do you go from 67 employees to 650 in a year? Like, I mean, that's a huge challenge in itself, just finding that much talent and bringing them on board. But so these are the same folks who sold Adalom for a pretty good $320 million to Microsoft. So they've got a solid background. And rumor is they will hit 200 million ARR at some point this year. But with a $10 billion valuation, that's still 50x. That's still a big number.
Yeah, so you know how the valuations work, right? It's absolute value and growth. So what's super crazy here is that, to see that kind of growth rate, you're usually at 5, 10, 15 million if you have a great company. To see that kind of year over year double or triple growth rate. So what's just absolutely mind-blowing and staggering is 0 to 100 in 18 months or whatever it was, right? August, or something like that. And then August of 22 to potentially March of 2023. Could they have 50% it again maybe already? Like then you're talking 100, a doubling, 200% growth, a doubling potentially this year or more on $100 million base. It's staggering.
They'd have to justify this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's staggering to have that kind of growth on that kind of base. Usually you start pushing 100 million, 150 million on the base number, and your growth is shrunk down to, high single digits, 10, 15%. You're killing it. You're killing it at 15% year over year growth at 150 million ARR. For them to be doubling is just unheard of. I can't believe that at some point they've got to tap that market. They've got to get to the end of that TAM. And I just wonder when that's going to happen. Stuff will have to slow down for them.
I mean, cloud is huge. I don't know what that TAM looks like, but public cloud is somewhere up in like 250, 300 billion in spending or revenue in that market. So, the market's big enough. Certainly, I think for what they're looking for, but I wonder how much of that market they've got to claim. Like a third of it, to be able to hit these numbers. And founded in January 2020. They are barely 3 years old.
Barely 3 years old. And they say, if a typical company does, what is it, 1 million, 6 million, 15 million, that's a phenomenal first 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, they're not doing that. It's
no.
order of magnitude above that. Yeah, crazy stuff. So that's the big one today. Certainly, Wiz is the one to watch. I think at that point, like at this point, what's next? They're talking IPO. I mean, I joked, I think in the intro that they're too big to buy, but they may be too big to buy. In fact, we saw. Yeah, so not security related, but Figma. It looks like the U.S. government is with the goal of antitrust is going to try and block the Adobe acquisition of Figma, which was a $20 billion acquisition, which is double what we're talking about Wiz being valued at here. But yeah, you're getting into antitrust territory, with acquisitions this large. I think the biggest one we've ever seen was the Activision Microsoft deal, which I still don't think has gone through yet.
That's still not
like
done.
60 something billion. It was a huge one.
Yeah, and that's still not done. It too got ripped up and destroyed by antitrust issues. I don't know if it'll ever go through. But yeah, I see that this has to be an IPO. And what's interesting is their timing could be perfectly spot on when it really comes down to it. Run this thing for another year, maybe year and a half. Hopefully by that point, the IPO doors and windows reopen and they're able to just get this thing liquidated publicly.
Yeah, timing is so important here. And there's some other markets where I'm looking at tracking companies where I'm really cringing. I'm really thinking, these guys went too big. They swung too big, and it might be a miss for them. But a lot of that depends on what the market does and how quickly it comes back.
And it also just depends on whether you can go from zero to 100 million in 18 months.
Yeah, that's crazy. All right, Deep Watch is on here also. I'm still kind of scratching my head at services organizations being funded like software startups. But Deep Watch, MDR, we've seen a bunch of other ones here. Arctic Wolf raising a ton of traditional VC money based on what is effectively a services organization. But I guess they figured out how to to really kind of expand that services organization where they can scale like a software company, even though it's humans, butts and seats that are providing the service.
Yeah, it all comes down to efficiencies and margin, right? I mean, you get a better multiple for a product because your margins are through the roof. You're going to get a better multiple for a pure SaaS software product than you will a hardware product. And you'll get a better multiple for a hardware product than you will a human-derived capital product. It's all because of the margin levels.
And we talked about it in both of our previous interviews, just progressively putting more and more automation into place where it makes sense to put automation. And you can realize those kinds of margins with a business like this.
Yep, and you realize
but you got to
exit. You get the multiple.
You got to be aggressive though. Like I imagine all these MDR firms are looking real hard at how they can use ChatGPT.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
So this is a big seed funding. Number 4, $53 million in seed funding for passwordless authentication and user management platform. Identity management firms have been known to get big, to IPO. We've got Okta. We've got a lot of large organizations. Identity is a really big market, so I can see it. But yeah, it looks like somebody's trying to grow this one, kind of like Wiz here, where they're looking to get it to market really quick.
So Wiz came out of stealth with $100 million in funding, if I recall correctly. And at the time, I remember thinking, what? 100 million in funding? Like, why?
Yep.
That makes no sense.
They had 600 million within 18 months.
Yeah. So it clearly worked for them, but I think anybody that tries to copy that model has a 99.999% chance of failure. So please don't go out and over invest in your companies. That era is long behind us.
Time will tell. We'll see how it goes.
I also think with this market, it's a good market. It's time for the market to explode, but there are so many companies now that are in this space that I think it's going to be hard for any new entrants unless they're doing something radically different. And I only got a little bit of time to browse through all of these today, but it doesn't look like they're doing something that radically different. So I think it's going to be hard for some of these new entrants to really make up that difference, especially if they're just raising 53 million is huge for seed.
Well, the point of raising that much money is, the only reason you raise that much money is if you need it to actually make the physical item that you're selling, which in the case of software you do not, or you believe it's a race to a single winner market. And if you can show that it's truly like a winner take all game, it is a winner take all zero-sum game, then yeah, overinvest, run it over. That's what Wiz has essentially done. Orca's kind of number 2 in that space and doing amazingly well, by the way. I heard their numbers recently, and I can't repeat them, but I heard those numbers recently and I was amazed at the growth. And the person I was talking to was depressed because they weren't Wiz. And their numbers were through the charts amazing. And I just couldn't believe it. So I think the only time that you should be taking that much funding pre-seed is when you know for a fact, 100%, that it's a single winner market and you need to dominate it right out of the gate, or you will lose and go to zero.
I just don't see that happening here.
No, I don't see it happening in any cyber. It technically shouldn't have happened to Wiz. I don't know why it really happened in that market. Or maybe that market is just so astronomically large that they can run at it super hard and attempt to take the whole thing over and still leave room for Orca and Aqua and number 2 and 3 to live.
Yeah.
I think Adrian, there. Oh, you're on mute or something, buddy. You're just mumbling to yourself.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I was just looking on LinkedIn at Wiz's hiring growth, and they didn't show up on my layoffs list, but it's entirely possible that they did some layoffs, but we're still hiring so much that the layoffs were just buried. But yeah, I don't see a dip in the total employee count, but it does look like they've at least flattened. So they're, for the last month. It doesn't look like they've hired any for the last month, but they're also not dropping. They're at 734 employees, which is insane for a company that's barely 3 years old.
Yeah. So back to Dscope, it seems to be some kind of an authentication, passwordless authentication for applications that you're building, is the way I understand it, which is going to be neat to see how that works out. I think that's been an area that multiple companies have tried to figure out, put this little component in there and everybody can authenticate it kind of thing. And I think if they solve that problem and truly get rid of passwords for applications that we build in a way that's easy to use and secure and safe for the user base, it is a massive problem. So I understand why they could have sold the vision. The question is, do you need that much money to run over the market at the end of the day, or can you build it in a little bit healthier way? Feels like they're taking the big shot. They're going for the moonshot. So good luck to them, and I hope they do well.
Which was so they're competing directly with Auth0 here, which Okta picked up. I'm trying to remember what the acquisition price was for Auth0.
Was that one?
6.5 billion.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's in the billions.
So that's what these guys are aiming at here.
Yeah, but Auth0 years ago and did what they did. So, what's the reinvention? What makes them better than Okta?
Well, it's not passwordless, not doing passwordless necessarily.
Wow.
I mean, it depends what you call passwordless, because Auth0 does do single sign-on, but they charge extra for doing SAML. So if you can disrupt that, that's something I've heard a lot of people complain about. People complain about companies charging extra for security features, but the charge doing it as well. So it's tough not to those extra costs.
Speaking of charging for extra security features, you guys catch our buddy Elon Musk over there charging for two-factor?
Well, no, charging for shitty two-factor. So I'm backing this because it's trying to disincentivize using SMS two-factor and to move to more secure factors. So if you're going to do that, like, that's not terrible, I don't think.
So I'm gonna take the other side of that. That's like saying, I didn't have an analogy prepared, but I'm sure there's some kind of analogy with airbags or car crashes and stuff like that. But listen, I would be totally fine if everybody on Twitter actually did the basic 2FA with the text messaging. Sure, it can be spoofed. Yes, it can be captured, but it raises the bar so significantly. You cannot charge for that. To me, I think he's smoking something to go charge for that.
Yeah, and yeah, so when you meet reality there, yes, it's good to incentivize less secure options, but if we're talking about any MFA is better than no MFA, and the friction to go to other MFA options is so great that people just aren't going to do it.
That's what's going to.
We could talk about people just disabling MFA altogether and just going with username and password, nothing else.
And I think the average person on Twitter, not the security or not the security world that we live in, but the average person, and not the celebrity that's highly targeted, but the average person, they have their chances of even turning on the basic one was slim to none. You put the friction of having to put Duo or something else on their phone too, forget it. They'd just be like, forget it. Twitter's not that important to me. I'm just not going to do it. I'll go baseless. So you're actually disincentivizing across the board people to use security in your environment by charging for that low-level security. And the reason they're doing it, the rumor I heard was to lower costs, because it costs money for them to send text messages. So they're like, let's get rid of text messages. Everywhere within the app that sends text messages, get rid of it. Well, in this case, they couldn't get rid of it because it was a security service. So they're like, great, we'll just charge for it so we can make the money back at least.
No, that absolutely tracks with the kind of changes that Elon's been making, and trying to lower the Twilio bill. I think totally fits into that model
at the expense of the security of their users, which I think he's smoking something. And as a matter of fact, I put out an article recently in my newsletter with a photo of him smoking something right at the top.
Yep. No, you have a strong argument there. Definitely have a strong. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's a good point. Like using SMS services, that's yet again, so that's where I think Dscope could differentiate here from Zero and Okta in not charging for something that the rest of the industry is charging for and tends to pass on to customers. So yeah, there's an opportunity here as well. Like if you're using Twilio, if you're using what's built into AWS, sending an SMS message is going to cost money. But using TOTP, just token codes, like with Google Authenticator or Authy or something like that. I think you can just do that with a library. You don't need a third-party service to do that. So yeah,
wish them the best. That's for sure.
Another thing where time will tell. Like we just got to wait and see how it all falls out to see if it blows up in their faces, or if
I don't think at the end of the day. I think at the end. Yeah, no, I agree. I think at the end of the day, whenever I see a new company that says, "Hey, we're going to get rid of the password," my heart just, please win, please win. I don't need to know anything more. Just win.
Yep. Hope for the best. For here, kind of rapid fire through PayPal leads. Was that me?
Yeah, you were cutting out. So while you're looking at that, I'll take the lead on this one. On the PayPal co-leads a $20 million seed funding for on-chain risk optimizer Chaos Labs. So other than the cool name Chaos Labs, like that's a pretty badass name. I'm very interested in trying to figure out what an automated risk management platform at Chaos Labs actually does.
The name is the only reason I included it. Most of the web and blockchain stuff I don't include. To be Yeah.
It's the only thing that caught me out of the whole intro that I was like, that's pretty cool. The rest of it, I was like, blah, blah, wah, 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 wah. I just heard the Charlie Brown sound.
Well, I read this one part of the article, which I think makes this super clear. It says the official website states that Chaos Labs Risk Suite can help protect DeFi protocols through optimized risk and capital efficiency, streamlined risk assessments, and streamlined risk assessments.
It says it twice
That's
in the
very
article.
helpful.
Yeah, that's what it says. So I think that says it right there.
I had lunch with somebody today that said, you know what, Tyler, sometimes I turn on ESW and I jump to the part where all you guys do is make fun of the buzzwords, because that's my favorite part.
It's so easy to do.
Well, it's hard to do anything else. Like when we don't understand what they're trying to say, what do we have left but to make fun of it? And it's not like we're completely ignorant about this stuff. Like it's just a style of writing press releases, which is why we did a whole segment just on how to write good press releases, like a year or two ago.
When he told me that he skips through the rest of ESW to get to that part, I wasn't sure if I should be offended or happy, but we'll figure that out.
It's definitely fun. It's fun for us also to go through this stuff. So yeah, I'm just going to kind of rapid fire through these because there's a ton more funding and there's more interesting stuff I want to get to. So a company called Matomic raises $20 million to protect sensitive data in SaaS applications. I don't know if that's considered DSPM or not. Didn't have time to dive too deep into that. Entitle launches with $15 million in seed funding to bake security into permissions management. Riot prepares your team against highly sophisticated cyber attacks. I think this is like an MDR or MSSP with a $12 million Series A based in France, but funded by a San Francisco VC. So interesting to see some of these U.S. funding sources funding European startups. It's very interesting.
The Riot one is pretty interesting because it's actually an educational product that's around security awareness training. But then they are incorporating a chatbot called Albert, and so they're using AI to fight AI. So here we go. We can throw in our ChatGPT jokes on this one.
We can also throw in our Clippy jokes too. It's not like Clippy.
Yeah, it looks like they're going for an Albert Einstein likeness there, except he's got an earring in one ear. So it's kind of like a hipster Albert Einstein.
Hipster Albert. I love it. I love it. But it feels very Clippy to me. If you guys remember Clippy, when he used to come up and suggest you do the Microsoft Clippy thing. So it's like, all right, well, I hope it doesn't go the way of Clippy.
With everybody, with all the AI going on, all the chatbots going on, Clippy comes up constantly. Is Microsoft going to bring Clippy back? They're adding AI to Word again. Is Clippy going to be? Yeah. The latest John Oliver, I think, even had a somewhat adult-themed Clippy segment.
Love it.
Yeah, it's. I'm not going to go into any more details than that. CyberSmart raises £12.8 million in Series B funding. I forget what they do. SendMark secures $7 million Series A funding for email and domain security protection. So nothing that really jumps out at me here. VulnCheck raises $3.2 million for vulnerability prioritization. That's already a pretty deep market. That's a pretty late entry into a market that already has late entries, like Nucleus Sec. I think is the last one I've seen enter that market. That's been really interesting to me. Nucleus.
I wonder though. There's a couple of things there. There's an opportunity here, and I don't know if VulnCheck is doing this. I like VulnCheck. I know a couple of the devs. I know the founder well. They've been bootstrapped for a while. They just took in their first round of funding. They've been around for a couple of years before taking in funding. I think there's an opportunity in this space, particularly kind of this correlative vulnerability analysis space or vulnerability intelligence, exploit intelligence, vuln prioritization market, where, God forbid, here I'm going to bring it up, but we use contextual AI or potentially even generative AI to look at the universe of what you have in your world to determine whether risks are real or not given your particular threat models. And I don't know if that's what VulnCheck is doing, but I think there is opportunity in that market that they're playing in for a much smarter version of prioritization based on what you actually have, including things like mitigating factors, et cetera, but not relying on you to hand enter that data or you to mentally do the gymnastics of whether we care about a particular vuln, but actively looking at what's in the environment, what's in your world, and pulling that data into a smart decision algorithm.
Yeah.
I think, the number one thing that I hear in my day job is, this is great. A lot of companies surface vulnerabilities. What the hell do I do about them? Everything is listed based on data that's maybe not actionable, maybe not relevant, or there are just too many of these high and critical. So, people are lost. Even if you give them information, it's not necessarily appropriate for their environment, and it's not helping. The more data we give them is not helping. It's all about, actually, Adrian said this today, so I'm totally going to steal what you said on a call we had earlier. It's all about reducing the data to focus in, and not a lot of tools are doing that. And not a lot of people can manage that, certainly not manually.
Yeah, honestly, these days, EPSS is the most recent exciting thing I've seen in this space, which was a scoring system that was developed between Rand and folks at Scientia Labs, like Jay over there, and Kenna Security. And for any CVE out there, like they have an API where you can just hit it and it'll tell you the score, and it's just between 0 and 1. Is it likely for an exploit to be created for this or unlikely? And then combine that with some of your internal stuff, like the contextual information. Is this exposed to the public internet? Is it high asset criticality level, stuff like that? Like, I don't think it gets any more magic than that. Like, those are the important things to take into account. Is it going to be exploited? And is it something I care about is basically what it bakes down to. And I'm not sure that there's a whole lot more to be done in this space. Like, beyond that, it's just going to be hard. Like, you still have to have humans tell you the context. Is this exposed to the public internet? I'm still not seeing anything that makes that easy to answer without a human doing that. What's the criticality of this asset? I've not seen any big leaps taken there. It's still a human saying, yes, this has critical data on it, or this is a critical system that we can't live without. Still a person.
I think there's a lot of systems now that are starting to come around, Adrian, that are providing that context. Specifically the context, like the two things you mentioned, the contextual awareness of, is this internet accessible? That's actually programmatically achievable very easily just by looking at configuration states of the network path.
Right.
And what was the other one you provided too? I can't remember what it was now, but it also had a relatively straightforward kind of contextual awareness. The hard part is getting access to all that context and then making the smart decision based on that context. And I think that is, when it comes to AI in security, not security of AI, but AI in our security systems that we use, that's where a lot of AI and the intelligence is going to start to be, a real game changer in cybersecurity as we take breadth of context in to augment the decisions that we're already making in our traditional security tooling.
Yeah, it just, you get into a lot of niche cases, especially once you start getting into larger companies where, yes, that asset has a routable IP address and maybe it is internet accessible on this port, but it's not on these other ports. So you run into these issues where, and again, yes, programmatically, you can get all the information on that. You can read the AWS ACLs, but it's a bunch of extra work to go get that. I'm not seeing a lot of companies doing that yet. I think we can get there, but then, yeah, the other big leap there is just to get the integration in place, the other people you work with to get access to that configuration data.
Yeah, I think luckily computers are good at two things: collecting data and crunching data. And that's the exact two problems you've identified. And by default, compute is good at that. So it will eventually be solved. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it'll be.
It's just the people screwing it up. You got to get the people out of the way.
Damn people, get rid of all of them. Don't ask AI. I'm sure they'll eventually suggest killing off all the people too. Don't worry.
I love that Jim got into the politics. Like, look, you got to have somebody in your pocket. Yeah, it's just it's a thing and he didn't say in your pocket, but yeah, I mean, you got to have somebody on your side, and it's one of these things where you want to integrate with somebody's system. Like, you got to convince them that it's worth it for them. Like, what's the benefit for them? What do they get out of the relationship? All right. Any of the other fundings anybody wants to talk about before we jump into acquisitions?
Let's hit the acquisitions. Let's go.
Yeah. So very early acquisition. I don't think Canonic, and very different from Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu. Canonic Security was picked up by Zscaler here. I actually looked for public filings. There's no information on what the deal size was, but AppTotal is the product from Canonic here. The company was still at the seed stage, I think. I don't think they had quite gotten to the Series A stage, but not quite SaaS security. Like, at a glance, you would think it's SaaS security, but it's more of like a forensic tool, like an investigation tool where you can take any kind of Chrome extension or integration with your Google Workspace, Office 365 or something like that, and you can drop it into this like search engine that AppTotal has, and they'll tell you if they're like what the product's doing and the permissions it's asking for, and whether or not it's asking for way more permissions than it actually needs. Which I saw a research report a couple months ago on this that said something like 85 or 90% of these ask for way more permissions than they need. Like maybe it's a tool that puts like like Calendly, like it puts something on your calendar for you, but for some reason it's asking for full access to Google Drive and all your Gmail.
Yeah, but that was the same problem that we had in mobile early on, mobile apps, right? They were all over permission too.
Yep. Except for BlackBerry. BlackBerry had that nailed. They just screwed up everything else.
That's true.
Yep. Yeah, they really were way ahead of their time in really the nuances and nitpicks of permissions over, microphone, camera, hardware features, different data stores and stuff like that. But just insisted nobody would want to use a smartphone without a hardware keyboard. And man, did they get that wrong.
Yeah. The only other thing that really turns me off about this too, and one reason why I think that they had to have gotten acquired instead of doing well long term, was that one of the founders uses a Dvorak keyboard. Total fail.
I thought that was hilarious. That was in his Crunchbase bio.
That's the right place for that. Yeah. I mean, that, and I put out like the baked cookies in my LinkedIn bio too. Same thing.
I mean, at least he picked a decent composer. What if he had picked like John Cage or something?
Right, but not just the keyboard layout, but that just happens to collision with a classical composer's name.
I don't know where to take that. I'm sorry. That's just really wrong.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to make a bad joke.
Yeah, I know. No. That's what made it a good joke, is that it was so bad, Katie.
Thank you. That was coming from you, Tyler. That's high praise.
I'm great at bad jokes. I'm the king of bad jokes.
Appreciated. Yeah, Boris is he's a friend of mine. Met him when he was the CTO for FireLayers, which got acquired by Proofpoint. So yeah, great that they had an exit here. Curious about what the exit was like, but in this market, I have to assume it was nothing crazy, no 30 or 50x here, but good to have any kind of exit in this market's good, right?
Right.
Maybe. Let's see. So we talked about Siren. I don't want to dwell on that too much, but yeah, Siren is shut down, liquidated, kind of bankruptcy. That's I think it's chapter 12. That's liquidation. Chapter 7 is the restructuring, where you try and keep the business running. But this is the shut it down, sell off the assets. Let's see what kind of value we can give investors and lien holders out of this. Moving on, I noticed that. So I was just looking at the performance of some of the other security companies that went public via SPAC. It doesn't look great for any of them. I saw this story saying there are a ton of companies that went IPO via SPAC, ending in a pile of bankruptcies. So Siren is not one of those. Siren had been around for a long time. But IronNet and ZeroFox are two companies that look like they're struggling right now in the public market and went public via SPACs.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, SPAC stuff's it's just the first to get smashed. When you didn't do any due diligence on bringing out the companies into a public universe, and then you get thrust right into the seventh layer of Dante's Inferno as the market destroys around you. It's a tough spot to come back from. And they have to quickly get to, or at least show a path very quickly to get to profitability. And if you don't have that in the bag because you didn't do all the diligence on IPO the way you should have to go IPO, you're in deep trouble. And that's why the SPACs are all getting ripped up.
Any bets on whether we hear Chamath Palihapitiya comment on this?
Yeah, I did recently read a piece about the former SPAC king, or the current, what they used to call him the SPAC king. But the article's funny. One or two of them, and I can't remember which ones, paid for him, I believe, paid for everything of all the other losses. So,
really?
Like the VC game, if you get one or two that are super hyper successful, you just write off the other losses. But the problem with that is you don't really realize. I'm sure he did realize, but he didn't. He doesn't really talk about the fact that you're destroying hundreds and thousands of people's lives that are in these companies that you are now bringing public prematurely and then having ripped out from underneath them, right? Sure, you made profitability because you hit one or two that were hyper successful, while the other 8 of the 10 you brought out died, right? So he doesn't talk about that part of it very often.
But is he barely on the right side of breaking even, or is he like 100x on those other two?
No, he's barely on the right side of breaking even. I don't believe he lost his shirt, is what I'm getting at. At least that's what the article said.
Yeah, not looking like SPACs were a great idea in hindsight.
No, when you posted this, I did a little bit of research just to figure out what it looked like at a holistic level. And just the more I dug, the more time I spent, the more searches I did, the more horrifying it got. And I mean, I guess some would say that who are in favor of SPACs, that it was an attempt to try something to make everybody more successful, to make everybody more money, to speed up the market, by taking away the red tape, the whole, we don't like bureaucracy argument there. And I get it, but it's just horrifying, as Tyler said, that people didn't put enough thought into it. It was a get-rich-quick scheme, and we've never seen in history where that really works out in the long run for a lot of people. And so I'm not sure why this was even allowed to happen. I'm not necessarily in favor of regulating everything for everybody, but somebody should have seen this, because it really did. It made a lot of promises to a lot of people who, especially the little guy, it is really hurting because of this right now.
So what you're saying is removing guardrails can be problematic, right?
Yeah.
They might be there for a reason.
Guardrails might be there for a reason. I mean, hey, when they mandated seatbelts all those years ago, yes, I'm old, I was like, nobody can tell me. And then I started reading the statistics, and I'm like, well, you know what? I was being an idiot. Maybe I should wear my freaking seatbelt. Now I would never, ever get in a car without a seatbelt. So You can, shake your fist at the clouds and yell all you want, but these things are there for a reason. And somebody allowed these SPACs to run rampant. And, some people listening might say, well, okay, a lot of cybersecurity companies fail, or a lot of companies fail. Well, yeah, that's true. But there are people on the other side of it who are, they need their rent or their mortgage. They need food. They need shoes on their feet. And if you're making all of these promises to them, well, maybe they were naive too, but you're still ruining lives.
And in the vein of, talking about, sacrificing jobs and things like that, there was an interesting, number 25 is an interesting article from a Stanford professor talking about how all these layoffs are really just triggered by copycat behavior rather than, something that these companies needed to do. It's more about sending the signal that, hey, we're trying to manage our burn. We're looking out for, the long-term health of the company when, I guess he's suggesting here it's more about looking like you're doing the right thing than doing what's actually right for the company.
Yeah, I definitely have some thoughts on this one. I think that it's exactly right. There's a significant amount of herd mentality out there, right? It's that concept of, well, if everybody's doing it, there's got to be a reason, and I'm going to do the same thing. And so I think there's certainly a herd mentality problem where, hey, all these layoffs are occurring, we better do the same thing. I also think there's a bit of a factor here where it may not just be pure copycat behavior, but also idealistic behavior, let's call it, where, hey, Elon's killing people off, or insert big name security company leader X is laying off a bunch of people. Well, they're smart. They're billionaires and made tons of money. They're wicked smart. I better do what they're doing, right? So I think there's copycat behavior. I think there's idol worship behavior. But then simultaneously, when you look at what's going on in the market, it's de-risking. It's an intentional smart de-risking to your business, which makes the layoff smart. And in some ways, in a truly cold-blooded way, hey, here's the time if you want to lay off 10% of your staff that may not be very good at what they're doing, that you can blame it on somebody else. And now you can do a layoff and not feel bad about it as a leader, right? I think there's some of that in there too. I think it's all of it together. I would not say it's just copycat behavior.
I would
think there's
also
a
add
bunch
to
of
that.
Do something as well. It's like people are looking to the company, shareholders, et cetera. Do something. We need to do something to make sure that we are prepared for what might happen. But the article itself even says in many instances, layoffs don't increase stock prices or cut costs. And then there's talking about there's other consequences around that, such as cost of severance, loss of productivity, as well as a brand issue where that company was seen as doing layoffs. Maybe I, as a good worker, may not want to go and work there. Sorry, Katie, go ahead.
No, you actually touched on something I was going to say, which is I think there are two other factors at play in addition to what you said and what Tyler said. It's a reputation thing. Companies want to protect their brand, so they don't want to look like maybe they're doing something out of the ordinary, and they also don't want to look like they're bucking any trends. So, all these other companies are doing it. Hey, we can maybe figure out a way to cut costs here and not look like the bad guy. So they're not actually thinking about what's right for the business because they're not actually doing the calculations to figure out if it's right for their business, which is the second factor that comes in, which is laziness. I think they are just following a lot of companies, not all of them, certainly. There are a lot of smart people out there too, but some companies are just being lazy and saying, well, hey, cutting people will save us costs. And then they don't do the actual calculation. They don't think about it, what they're losing, what they have to pay out, how they have to follow up. Somebody like Elon Musk, I will not agree that he is smart, but he doesn't care. He doesn't give a shit about his workers, and he doesn't care what it costs. He wants to lay people off, and he wants to be seen as the alpha dog. But when it comes to real businesses that are actually run well, you have to say, all right, what's the cost benefit here? What's the short-term effect going to be? What's the long-term effect going to be? And I think there are a lot of people who are taking the quick route by saying, these other companies are doing it, and not doing the individual cost calculation, just like we talk about with risk. They're not doing the individual risk calculation because it's too hard. They're relying on some tool to tell them. And in this case, the tool is public sentiment.
Yeah, you're 100% right on that. And the whole Elon thing really throws me off because people are like, well, he's axing what percent of Twitter or whatever the layoffs that he's involved with are doing. But you got to understand, the guy literally has more money than anything. And a lot of problems in business can be solved by shoveling more money at it. A lot of problems. Whether you make that money by having a good business that generates a lot of revenue, giving you more money to operate, or like him, you got pockets so deep, you just put another 100 million in and fix the problem. So people don't understand that your business is different than Twitter and Tesla. Your business is your business, and you don't have hundreds of millions of dollars in your pocket to just put on the table if your culture gets ruined by destroying, by laying people off the way he laid it off and kills the culture. Well, guess what? $100 million to all of his employees spread out to hire a bunch of new people and maybe give a bunch of people raises afterward will sure fix that problem for him, or hopefully, right? But my point is, like, your company is different than all of the other companies, and you can't just follow herd mentality, which is what I think the key point of this article really is trying to bring up.
There's another Elon conundrum that leaders or executives face, right? Like, if Elon gets this horrifically bad reputation, why would he care? If you're just a regular old CEO, I mean, maybe you've made a lot of money, but maybe you haven't and you need another job. And if you have killed a company by taking the wrong tack because you didn't do your homework, you're not getting another job.
Don't be so sure of that. I know a lot of dumb money out there that'll still give you a lot of money to start a company.
Damn it, Tyler, stop killing my dream of karma.
I know. I'm such a voice of reality.
Adam Newman.
Yeah, exactly. Adam Newman. Well played.
Oh, geez. Yeah, he's in real estate again. He's got money again. Oh man. All right. Let's we gotta wrap here pretty soon. So let's pick out some of the best ones here. I think number 29 is kind of related to what we're talking about, this herd mentality. But this is something I learned reading a book called Biology. There's a guy involved in advertising and marketing who is supposedly the first person to actually do brain scans and things like that when using different marketing tactics and showing people advertisements. And one of the things he learned from that, and one of the big takeaways from this book, is that what people say is not what they do. And that sounds rather obvious, but once you understand that rule, changes how you put together surveys, changes how you read market data, how you use it. And this is just yet another example of that, where a survey said 27% of people said they would hand over their unlocked phone to somebody who just asks, to privately look at someone's phone with access to all the data and apps and stuff. And so only 27% said they would do this, when in fact they carried out the experiment. 98% of people did, because social pressure is a real thing.
No comment, because quite frankly, no surprise.
Yeah, I mean, it's why phishing works.
Yeah. Didn't we learn anything from the pandemic? You don't let dirty people touch your stuff.
Reminds me of a situation where researchers were giving out candy bars for passwords, and people would sell the password.
Chocolate for passwords, yep.
I would totally sell Adrian's password for a chocolate bar.
You would not. You hate chocolate.
Yeah, but I don't really care about Adrian's password, so I'd still do it.
That's how little regard he has for my security. Thanks, man. Thanks.
You're welcome, man.
Oh, wait a minute. We did not cover what day it is today. You missed that.
Yeah,
I thought it was Old Stuff Day.
Old Stuff Day. Yeah.
What is it?
So we forgot.
Is there another day?
No, that's it. It was I think it's literally
Old Stuff,
called.
That's right. It was that non-memorable Old Stuff Day.
It's Old Stuff Day. Out with the old and with the new.
That's when we almost stopped the podcast because we need to be replaced by younger hosts. Let's see here.
I'm so old I forgot.
See, exactly. We've proven that we need to be replaced. Yeah, I thought it was funny that even hackers are getting laid off by crime groups. So even just backs up the the observation that cybercrime is organized enough that it really runs like a business, that this market downturn has even resulted in layoffs for cyber criminals and cybercrime groups. So not a whole lot to talk about there. It's just it's kind of it's a funny news item to reflect on. Let's see. I've got a story in here, number 32, is about prompt engineering being a thing. So that's, I think that's important to understand for folks, even though it's not directly security related. Anytime we see new technology come in, security folks have to understand it. And right now, people are kind of giggling at it, like, oh, like it's not really a skill. But you get into it and you see what people can get out of some of these AI tools, whether it's artwork or graphic design or copy for a marketing brochure site or something like that. There's definitely some value in people who know how to work the system. Like the example I saw is, somebody saying, because apparently ChatGPT is really bad at math, but there are AI bots out there that are specifically good at math. Like ChatGPT will just make some shit up and try and convince you that it's the truth. Even outside math, like facts and stuff like that, you cannot trust it. So there's apparently a way to just tell ChatGPT that it's bad at math and to use this integration instead anytime it's given a math problem. So it goes pretty deep with how you interact with these chatbots, how to optimize the prompt, how you're asking for things. It definitely looks like it's going to be a real skill, and people are already hiring folks for 200, 300K as prompt engineers. And this is actually an interview with somebody who does this. So it's really interesting to read through the interview, and he talks about what his job is like, what kind of stuff he does. As a prompt engineer.
I'll do some prompting and some engineering for 300K a year.
Do it. Let's see, what else? I think there was some good stuff at the end here. We've got cybersecurity labels coming soon. I'm actually scheduling somebody for us to interview on the podcast talking about IoT certifications for security. That looks really cool. There's an organization that really goes in depth on secure boot, on all these like nitpicky little details of what the manufacturer's done in terms of security, and certifies it at different levels based on what they've done. So don't want to dive too deep into that, because we'll have somebody on to talk about that pretty soon in the next month or so. LastPass got way worse. Maybe that's more of a Paul Security Weekly discussion, but it got way, way worse. Like, I didn't think it could get worse, but it's worse.
Oh yeah, I got the email today. I'm not on LastPass anymore, but yeah, I got the email today and I just deleted it. It's a train wreck.
It's got to be a huge hit to the revenue at this point. I don't know anybody still willingly using LastPass. If they can move, they've moved or in the process of moving right now. So yeah, that's going to be rough on them.
It was actually, I'll put a plug in. It was actually pretty easy to move. I thought it was going to be a pain in the neck, and it took me all of like 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, and I hear PSW did cover that in depth. So go ahead and check out last night's Paul's Security Weekly show if you want to hear somebody dive into the LastPass, latest LastPass issues a little bit deeper. And I think it's time for our squirrel stories, and then we'll wrap. So two of these things I think are really cool innovations, and one is just funny. So 4748, I think it's really cool that an inventor from Kenya created smart gloves that translate sign language into audible speech, which is really cool. We've got a lot of translation on devices now. My Pixel does a really good job of real-time translation that I got to try out when I was in Sao Paulo a couple months ago. But sign language is not something my Pixel can translate at all. So I think that's fascinating that these gloves can tell what's being signed and can translate that into audible speech. And then 48, this is the second case I've seen where cancer diagnosis can be done super easily with just like a doctor visit, like you would, find out if you have the flu or not. Almost that easy. The first was with a blood draw, and now this one is using urine. You can do early detection of cancer, which is always cool to see.
Early detection done easier is fantastic.
Something to get excited about.
Absolutely.
And then the final one
can
here
be made about that. That's really cool.
No, that's why I said those two are innovations I was really excited about. So I mean, there's still squirrel stories in the spirit of squirrel, being distractions, non sequiturs, outside what we normally talk about. And the final one that is kind of story is what romance scammers lean on for tricking people out of money, to the tune of, here in the U.S. alone, $1.3 billion in 2021 is how much they were able to trick people out of. And the number, does anybody want to read that? Anybody want to? I'll let somebody else do it. I've been talking a lot.
Read what in particular, Adrian? The romance scammer's favorite line?
Lies. The favorite lines.
Yeah, my favorite one is, I can teach you how to invest. I'm busted. Oh, I love that picture. Well done there, buddy. I appreciate being part of the squirrel imagery now. My favorite one is, I can teach you how to invest, because that's the one that I used to pick up women all the time. It works so well.
Yeah, and the number one item that is used, this isn't necessarily successful. No, this is success. These are things that have worked. So the top thing used that works is, I or someone close to me is sick, hurt, or in jail. So leaning on people's empathy.
Scam? Why is this called romance scam? Because I guess it leans on the empathy side of it. Like, there's nothing.
These aren't opening lines. This is like after you've kind of captured them and you've got their attention. Like they care about you. They give a shit about you at this point. Then this is maybe weeks in, you hit these guys hit them with the the urgency, whatever creates that sense of urgency that gets people to send money.
Yeah, the article says romance scammers tell all sorts of lies to steal your heart and money.
So it's just saying it's empathy. I read romance scammers and I was like, well, really, what does that mean? But then when you look at the bottom one, 3% of them actually were successful with, you can trust me with your private pictures. Spicy take.
You shouldn't trust anybody with your private pictures ever. Not even your phone.
Take private pictures. You shouldn't take them.
Well, that was sort of the implication, but yeah, sorry.
Not even your phone. I get it.
I mean, only marginally more successful is, I'm on an oil rig or ship. I've come into some money or gold, and we've never met, but let's talk about marriage.
That's how.
I mean, that's the new prince, the Jordanian prince, or whatever it was. Where was the prince from? Nigeria. I knew it was with Jordanian, Nigerian, same thing. They have princes there who have a lot of money and just want to give it to you in exchange for, $10,000.
Katie, don't make fun of it. That's how I met my wife. I picked her up with a text message about, hey, we've never met, but let's get married.
I was going to say something really mean.
I can't tell if he's serious or not. I can't tell if he's serious or not.
I'm not going to.
I
actually did get one of those texts yesterday. I got a, hey, how are you? Just following up. Who are you? We talked the other day. Who are you? I'm just following up on our conversation that we had. Who are you?
Sounds like a chat bot.
Yeah.
No, he came back and said a couple of other things, and I said, you have one more chance. You tell me who you are.
It came back. It was really your.
So you have one more chance. You tell me who you are, or I block you. Oh, don't block me. We've met in person. Goodbye.
See you later. Now your boyfriend can't get in touch with you at all. That's a bummer.
Yeah.
Well, if I could end with a song that wouldn't get us blocked on YouTube, it'd probably be Eleanor Rigby. Just thinking about all the lonely people that fall for these romance scams. It's got to be a lot of them to get to 1.8 billion.
That's a lot. One of the things I found interesting about the article is it said that 34% were paid through cryptocurrency, 27% through bank wire transfer or payment, 7% gift card, 3% was payment app or service, but 28% was other. I want to know what this other is. Like, that's a huge amount to be just categorized as other. Was it bags of cash at the grocery store parking lot? Like, what are these others? Were they packing up coupons?
Packing
goods. I bet they're goods like iPhones and stuff like that, or like shipping mule type stuff.
Could be. I thought you said kids, like selling your kids. I thought that's what you said. I was like, whoa.
Tyler, don't give away what you're thinking right now.
Real dark.
My next romance technique will be, hey, I know you've never met me, but I'll buy your kids.
I thought you were going to say, but I'll sell you my kid.
Or I'll sell you my kids. Even better.
Yeah, I think watching somebody's kids for them is a winning proposition.
Mine's about to go to college. You can have
them. You better invest in a SPAC.
All
right, Adrian, take us out.
And with that, I think it's time to wrap here. It's been suggested that I could sing the Beatles song, but I don't think I will. We'll do that in the. I get a charge for that. It's amazing. It's just I can't give it away for free. That's the reason. Thanks so much, guys. Tyler, Katie, Sean, for joining me today. Today's been a lot of fun. And a big thanks to everybody watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We're not going to break on the news segment again soon. We'll see you next week. We got a lot of good interviews lined up. See you then.